Hello, good morning. Welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got Alan Huntsberger in the studio with me. Dan, we're going to start off with our foundational verse. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Important verse, especially with today's program. Alan, why is it so important?
Well, I've been thinking about this verse, obviously, for, we've been on the air for 4 years, so there you go. But before the earth was formed, Corey, God had a plan. And he knew, for example, that there'd be a Goliath, and he already prepared a David. In 1 Samuel 16, while others looked at outward strength, God said, I see the heart. David was chosen long before the battlefield. Jesus confirms this in John 16:33, where he says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So we need to remember today, your battle doesn't surprise God. Your victory was written before creation.
Ooh, that's a good reminder.
There you go.
Well, someone who's in the battle is this guy right here, Jonathon Van Maren. Jonathan, thank you so much for being back on the show, my friend.
No, it's great to be here.
Well, we really appreciate you. We had you on before. You do all kinds of things, and I'm going to get a lot of them wrong, but you write. You're a writer, and we've been following what you've been writing on LifeSite News, but you've been published in National Post and all different kinds of publications. You're an author yourself. You've authored The Culture War, Seeing is Believing, Why Our Culture Must Face the Victims of Abortion, and many other things. You're also serving as a communications director for the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform. I mean, Jonathan, do you have any spare time? Because you are just so busy and you're writing a lot. I mean, you're writing a lot. I don't even know how you have time to do all this. Do you have any spare time at all during the day, or are you really busy?
I'm really busy. Spare time happens when I go home to have supper with my family, and then until the kids go to bed.
Yeah. Well, you're not writing like puff pieces. You're writing some very difficult things. And last time we had you on about abortion, I think we're going to touch that a little bit about today, because there was a story. We never got to it the last time you were on the show, but it was super mind-boggling to me. And I think it really shows the problem we have in our society. And you titled it, the headline was Unborn Baby Girl Saved After Rare Partial Birth Surgery. And I find that interesting because what we're told is the little bump in your belly is just a cluster of nothing. And you know what I mean? And it's not life, you know what I mean? But yet in this scenario, there was a problem with a baby being born. They do it. I'm going to go ahead and let you go into the story because it was fascinating, especially how Canadian government, categorizes a human or a non-human. Go for it.
So the story you're referring to is this extraordinarily rare surgery that took place in Georgia, where actually the baby had a problem with her mouth, with where her tongue was attached, and they performed the surgery where they partially delivered her to do the surgery, so she was sort of half born, half unborn. And in some instances with the surgery, they actually placed the baby back in the mother's womb when the surgery is completed. In the instance you're referring to, they safely delivered the baby, and it was another example of sort of this growing advance in medical technology where babies are actually being operated on inside the womb. You have corrective back surgeries being done on unborn babies. You have babies who are being taken out of the womb, operated on, and returned to the womb. And as you referenced, this kind of highlights both the moral and scientific schizophrenia of abortion regimes, particularly like that in Canada, where the criminal code states explicitly that the baby does not become a human being in the eyes of the law until he or she is fully delivered from the body of her mother. So a surgery like this done in Canada, where the baby is taken out, operated on, and returned to the womb, it would mean you would have a baby who is not a person, then a baby who's a person, and then a baby who's a non-person once again, which obviously makes no sense. But we have to kind of hang on to these weird legal fictions for the purpose of allowing people to kill children in the womb through extraordinarily violent means all the way up until birth. And you see this insanity actually kind of leak into court cases that have taken place in Canada. I remember the famous baby on the balcony case, which I watched live, where a baby was found on a balcony in the Greater Toronto area, but the judges didn't know whether or not the baby had died inside the womb or outside the womb. And so despite the fact that they were talking about a baby, they didn't know if they could refer to the baby as a baby. And so throughout the case, you hear these absurd phrases like the baby was, the contents of the uterus, any phrase but baby, because they didn't know about the location of the baby's death. It would be like referring to these judges as, say, the contents of black legal robes, rather than just referring to them as judges.
Do you find like this seems similar to almost to the transgender issue, right? Like it's like it depends on how you define it. Like if you're pro-life and you want to have a baby, you would consider it a baby. Of course, then they do the partial, birth, do the, surgery, put it back in. It's a baby. But if someone isn't pro-life, you know what I mean? They would consider it like a cluster of cells, similar to, someone can say, I'm a man, I'm not a man, I'm a woman, but they are biologically a man, or vice versa. It's like we're splitting hairs, it's really odd. And I know that it's part of an agenda to I don't know what that agenda is, to dehumanize, transhumanism. I don't even know where this comes from. Why are we in this word war where we can't just say the facts, what it is? It's a baby. You know what I mean? It's obviously everybody knows that. And what you're saying is just ludicrous to me. Where did this come from? How do we get out of this word war? Because it's so confusing and it's annoying, really, to be honest with you.
There's a few threads there that I definitely want to pull on.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to abortion, we do have this, again, it's a schizophrenia where when somebody says they're expecting, nobody ever asks what they're expecting. Everybody knows. And so when somebody refers to the fact that they're pregnant, everybody knows that they're pregnant with a child, not a penguin or a puppy or anything else. Everybody is aware of the facts. But the moment abortion comes up, people become strangely amnesiac about this fact that they had known, just 30 seconds prior. And so it's almost as if your value judgment of the child dictates whether or not the child is a child. And this is obviously fundamentally bizarre. Every single embryology textbook that is used in Canadian medical schools defines when human life begins. Human life begins at the moment of fertilization. And we even know in the language we use to discuss abortion when human life begins. So you'll get people saying, well, I don't know when life begins. And you say, well, when do you think a human life begins? And they'll say something like, well, maybe 12 weeks. Even that language reveals that they know when life begins, because 12 weeks from what? What happened 12 weeks ago? Well, obviously, the life of the person we're discussing began 12 weeks ago. And so when it comes to persuading people that abortion is an act of violence that ends the life of a developing human being in the womb, what we do at the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform is we try to reach millions of Canadians every year with the truth about abortion by showing them both abortion victim photography and imagery of children in the womb. With the transgender issue, you have another society-wide phenomenon that is similar in some ways, but is profoundly different in other ways. The major overlap, as you pointed out, is we have a battle over language. And so with abortion, we used to say things like unborn child, and now they'll say, well, you can't call it an unborn child, you have to call it a fetus. And fetus, of course, is Latin for young one, so you've just successfully called it a baby in a different language. Or you'll call it a clump of cells, but all three of us on this show are just clumps of cells. So using a series of descriptive phrases is not in any way undermining the point. It's just trying to disguise the point and distract from the fact that abortion is not about a what, abortion is about a who. With transgenderism, the primary way they made the case for it is this is now the T at the end of LGB, right? First, we decided that relationships, it didn't matter if it was a man and a man, a woman and a woman, so the gender inside a marriage doesn't make any difference. And now it's gender itself as a self-selected phenomenon. It's my truth. And they said, well, who does it hurt if a man says he's a woman? It's just my personal choice. It's my truth. But we saw very, very quickly thereafter that this was not about different people identifying the way that they choose. It was about forcing all of society to affirm their delusions. So it's not enough that this man thinks he's a woman. He must make it illegal for you to refer to him as a man. It must be part of Canada's hate crime laws to call him him. You now must call him she. And the Orwellian language reversal is so profound that if you call a man who identifies as transgender a man, they will say that you are misgendering, even though you are correctly gendering. But George Orwell put it in Politics in the English Language, one of the best essays written that describes this phenomenon. You first must win the war of words in order to win the war of ideology, which is why Dr. Jordan Peterson got rich and famous when he decided that he was going to reject the use of preferred pronouns, because he said it's compelled speech. You cannot force me to use my words to affirm your ideology. And they tried to cancel him, and instead he became one of the most famous Canadians in the world.
Okay, so we have that, what you just described and talked about. Then we have other issues happening, and it just seems like, and I'm seeing a common thread. Anything to do with life, anything to do with, basically how a Christian is supposed to live our lives, you know what I mean, in a godly manner. It seems the government is always trying to throw shackles on us and like roadblock us every step of the way. And the one thing I wanted to highlight is the one article you did on the blog about Quebec ruling punishes pro-lifers who offer help to women seeking abortions. And the reason why this part is important, and I'm going to let you go into it, but there's a Quebec judge who upholds the abortion bubble zones despite admitting they violate constitutional rights. So violating constitutional rights is happening a lot for the Christian community. Alan and I are a part of this. We just experienced it recently a few weeks ago. We haven't talked about it. But we have documentation where a government organization publicly states, I know what we're saying is against your constitutional rights, but basically we don't care. And so we're seeing this over and over and over again. Now, if you're raping or killing or stealing, or you're entering someone's home at 3 a.m. and doing whatever you want to do, no problem. You know what I mean? And by the way, you shouldn't touch that, person who's, robbing you, stealing you, breaking into your house. You need to leave them alone. We're just seeing this massive attack. Can you go into this Quebec ruling for me a little bit so we understand it better?
Yeah, I think that based on everything you've just said, it's probably worth zooming out a moment for all the viewers and the listeners, because all those individual things you just named seem insane, right? Pro-life people offering women help outside an abortion clinic are no longer permitted to do so, even though admittedly they have a constitutional right to do so. In other words, we can violate their right to freedom of speech because we have decided that the right to abortion supersedes that right. And this gets to something really important that I don't think people have considered. Every society fundamentally has founding values. And with the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s, we essentially began a war between two separate value systems. Canada was once based on the values of scriptural revelation. We were founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's why on the tower, the Peace Tower of Parliament, there's the Bible verse, without a vision, the people perish. We were once called the Dominion of Canada, based on the scriptural verse, he shall have dominion from sea to shining sea. But with the sexual revolution, we saw a shift from basing our values on scriptural revelation to basing our values on sexual revolution, because every society does prioritize a value set. And what we're seeing now is that the values of the sexual revolution are considered more important and supersede the values based on Christian revelation. And so you can now curtail all kinds of rights in favor of the sexual revolution. Freedom of speech can be restricted if you're saying things about the LGBT movement that the government doesn't like. Freedom of speech can be restricted if you're trying to say it outside an abortion clinic. There's currently attempts to restrict freedom of speech for those who show abortion victim photography on the streets. The head of the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada has publicly stated that the March for Life should not be permitted to take place because it violates the right to abortion in Canada. In Hamilton, just in the last couple of weeks, the mayor of Hamilton ordered a billboard to be taken down because it opposed sex changes for children. And so in each of these cases, you see the judges saying, we are violating certain rights of Christians who are saying these things, but we can violate those rights in favor of a more important value set, the values of the sexual revolution. And so we all know that our countries, almost every Western country, have gone through these profound revolutionary changes. What we've often missed is that when we shift from the values of from scriptural revelation to the values of sexual revolution, it means the legal system also realigns behind a new set of values. And the previous value system begins to get thrown out and to get overridden and overruled at every opportunity. And that's what we're all living through together.
Alan?
You know, Jonathan, I believe that there's also a problem, and that problem has to do with people that call themselves Christians. I mean, I look at myself, and I'm a problem. And Corey knows I'm a problem.
Hey, you said it. I didn't.
Yeah, but I'm a problem, and I'm, you know, sometimes I'm my worst enemy. But, you know, I think many believers today, you know, don't really know what it means to be a believer, because we're in a culture that's anti-Christian, and they don't understand where they should go. And so they're discouraged. And culture seems to be shifting faster and further away from biblical truth than we've ever imagined. So what gives you hope in the middle of this cultural moment?
Good point. Good question.
Well, that's a complex question. There's a few answers to it. Your opening remarks there remind me of what happened when the great English apologist G.K. Chesterton received a letter from someone who asked him to sum up the problems with the world, and his response was one line. He said, "I am," signed G.K. Chesterton. And that's, of course, something that's important for all Christians to recognize, that fundamental truth that it begins individually with us. I would say that the reason I have a lot of hope in the face of all of these major things taking place in our society is because I realize that it is actually possible to change people's minds. So the organization where I serve as communications director, the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, we reached 5 million Canadians with the truth about abortion last year. We see people change their minds from pro-choice to pro-life every single day. We have a wall in our office that's covered with stories and baby photos of children who were going to be aborted in Canadian abortion clinics, but their mothers changed their minds because they just talked to people on the streets who were willing to tell them the truth, were willing to sit through a conversation in which perhaps they were screamed at and yelled at, but were willing to take all of that abuse in order to have this conversation and present the most compassionate truths. So I see people change their minds about these fundamental issues all the time. And so when people say, well, the culture is collapsing and nothing can be done, my joke always is those who say it can't be done shouldn't interrupt those who are doing it. The reality is that if we approach people with the answers to the profound questions our culture are asking, we might be surprised at how open people are to hearing the answers to those questions. Because 25 years ago, people could kind of convince themselves that we could throw out the moral law, we could throw out Christian civilization, and we could still live pretty decent lives. That's not true now anymore. Even secular people are stunned by the fact that we're now debating sex changes for children. They're stunned by the fact that 4% of recorded deaths last year in Canada were lethal injection, were euthanasia. They're stunned by the fact that pornography has transformed the dating landscape to the point where 24% of adult American women stated that they felt fear during intimacy due to porn-inspired violence. They realize that the world we have created is profoundly hostile to human flourishing. And when people start to ask, where did we go so wrong? Christians should be ready to answer that question and then to supply the answers that we've always had and should have done a much better job of spreading.
You often are on the front lines of difficult cultural debates in abortion and euthanasia and sexuality, and it can be heavy work. How do you personally stay grounded in your faith while engaging in these battles?
It's very interesting because I think the first thing that we always have to point out is that you cannot do anything without prayer, full stop. Anybody who thinks that they can is fooling themselves. But it's actually very much when people say, well, how do you kind of stay sane dealing with dark topics? It's like my kids are 8, 6, 3, and then one still in utero. When you come home after dealing with all these kinds of things and sit down and talk to your kids, the questions are very small and they're a great relief. And so having the opportunity to come home and be with my family and talk to my kids and read them stories, and I'm reading them all of the old classics. We're going through Laura Ingalls Wilder. We're reading books about a different time. And the one of the greatest joys that I have is my kids aren't aware that the world is insane yet. They have no idea how bad things are because, at home and at their school and with their family and at their church, they're still living life like it was a long time ago. And they actually relate more to books written 50 years ago than books written 10 years ago. And this takes a lot of work, but we should never allow ourselves to be distracted from the enormous blessings God has given us in our personal lives, which are first and foremost our loved ones, by the darkness happening all around us.
Wow.
Good.
Finally,
point.
I have this question. What role do you see the church needing to play in the next decade if we're going to turn the tide?
So again, there's a number of answers to that question. I would start by saying that our culture is rapidly disintegrating in many ways. We've lost the foundation of our culture, and the replacement story, the story of the sexual revolution, only lasted as long as Christianity's lingering effects held our society together. And so the first two generations after the sexual revolution could persuade themselves that everything was going to be fine because most families were still whole. The majority of children were still born within wedlock. Pornography was the sin of a minority, not the majority. And so as long as Christianity's lingering effects held society together, they could persuade themselves that they could have their cake and eat it too. That is no longer the case. There's a reason why, a Googling of loneliness studies right now will produce well over 1 million results in less than 5 seconds. It's because the society we have created is profoundly miserable, and it's profoundly hostile, especially to the vulnerable. And so, again, we are living in a culture now where people are going to start asking themselves questions. They're going to ask themselves, how did we get here? And we should be ready to tell them a better story. We should be able to tell them a story of a culture that we lost, but more fundamentally, the values that culture was rooted in. I also think that the church has to ask itself, we have to ask ourselves very fundamental questions as well, because when we see a society in which the unborn are murdered in the womb, and then the elderly, the sick, the disabled are murdered at the other end of life spectrum, we have to start asking ourselves questions like this. What does it mean to be Christian in a culture that kills its children? What does it mean to be a Christian in a culture that kills the elderly? What are we doing to respond to those things? Because this age, this culture, this country demands things of us that we are not yet delivering on because we are not asking those questions. We are often asking very individual questions. We're very good at talking about prayer life. We're very good at talking about family. We're not very good at talking about what it means to be a Christian when babies are being killed at the hospital down your street, when obviously that does demand something of us. So what is it? I think that we should prayerfully consider that question, because the answer won't be nothing.
Wow. Whew. Agreed. We got 2 minutes left. And Jonathon, you mentioned it before that the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you barely touched it. I just want to know a little more about that.
So those who want to check it out, go to endthekilling.ca. We're an organization that seeks to reach the majority of Canadians with the truth about abortion and with compassionate abortion apologetics, where we talk to people about when life begins, why all human beings have a human right to exist, the right not to be killed, the scientific evidence for the fact that life begins at conception, and also the reality that abortion is an act of violence inflicted and perpetrated against the youngest members of the human family, and the responsibility that puts on all of us. This year, we had 94 people on our team from coast to coast, and we're out on the streets every day having conversations with ordinary Canadians about what abortion is.
Wow. I love it. Even your URL, man. End the killing. You said it. I mean, like, we don't talk about it enough. We become numb to the fact that right now down the street, they're killing babies every single day.
Yep.
And I would say even add made in that too. We're killing humans,
Yep.
you know what I mean? That are in a time in their life where they need help. They need encouragement. They need medical treatment. Some of them are waiting for surgery, and because they can't get it because they got to wait so long, they're going to end their life now. This is, I think what you were saying is, this is primo God-given opportunity right now for the church to rise up, to have a revival that we've all dreamt of, you know what I mean, when we were children, of God really coming and touching and healing a nation. Because I have been, you know, what am I, 53? This is like the most desperate I've ever seen the world become, which means there's also a great opportunity for the church to rise up and for God to do some incredible things. Do you agree?
Yes, I think the question that every Christian should ask themselves is, if everybody in Canada cared as much about abortion as I do and did as much as I do, would it make any difference at all?
I would say yes.
Perfect question.
All right, Jonathan, we really appreciate you. Definitely going to have you back because your writing's on so many different things that we can discuss and talk about. Thank you so much for bringing light to these dark conversations. It's needed. And I'm going to mull over that question about what the church can do and how we can activate it, because I agree with you. We do need to start being active in something that is just, I know it's on God's heart for sure. So thank you so much for being here. We'll have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was interesting conversation. I don't, you know, I try to always assess, how do I feel after talking with Jonathan? Do I feel better? Do I feel worse? Because I think I feel better because it's nice, Dad, that God has people, you know, standing, you know, up for the unborn, writing, speaking, following it. I'm also sad because it just seems like a massive undertaking to help our nation, to find healing, to help the mothers that are going through this, you know, debate of should I kill it? Should I keep it? But I know it's important to the Lord, right?
Well, because the earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord, things will get better as each of us begin to turn from our evil ways, to check out what have we been doing that has caused society to become so rotten. They became rotten in our charge. This country became rotten over the last, 50 years. So if you're 50 years old or older, you have to take credit or blame for how this world is going. And, the greatest enemy against us is fear.
Yeah, for sure. You want to help support our mission, keep this conversation and truth on the air. We are viewer supported. We don't take government funds or special interest groups. It's only because of the generosity of those that watch this show that we can continue broadcasting across our nation. You can go to our website and give by going to www.gotalktruth.com. Click on the donate button. You can give digitally that way. If you'd like to do it through the mail, you can. You can make your gift payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association and send it to 246 Stewart Green Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H 3C8. And if you like prayer, you can call our toll-free number, 1-800-915-0056 in Canada, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.